Stories now with the Catholic chaplain to the University of Essex, Father Paul Keane, former Labour Home Secretary Jackie Smith and Carol Malone from the Sunday Mirror. So welcome properly to all of you. And the Pope. We have to talk about him, don't we? Because he's, as we saw there, he's on... we have one, yes. And he's made it to the front of a lot of tomorrow morning's newspapers. There's the Telegraph's front page. Pope Francis the Humble is how they headline it, with a picture of him smiling to the crowds down in St Peter's Square. What do you make of this appointment, Father Paul? Well,
it's a great headline in the Daily Telegraph, and it seems to be true when he came out with that Buonasera, and his whole manner, just really wanting to be intimate with the people he was talking to down in that square, and such a young audience looking back up at this man. But it's been a night of surprises. We weren't expecting someone to be chosen today because we thought there were no front runners, so it would take longer. It's our first Pope for, more than 1,300 years from outside Europe. He's taken a name that no other Pope has ever taken before and associated himself with this great saint of living out poverty with the poor whilst evangelizing. And also he's a Jesuit, which has been it's a religious order in the church which is very intellectual but also very pastoral. If you've ever seen the film The Mission with Jeremy Irons back in the early 80s, they were the Jesuits fighting for the rights of the native people of Latin America. So we don't know much about him so far. In many ways, we're going to have to learn to know him, but I think people are already beginning to love him.
Well, and you studied in Rome, didn't you?
I did.
So give us an idea of how you think the news will be going down there. What will they make of it? Where did they think this new Pope might take the Church?
Well, I think there was an utter surprise. Of course, it was first announced by a French cardinal in Latin. So first you're trying to take it from Latin to whatever language you know. And I think there was a pause for some time, people clicking.
Yeah, I noticed
Who is it?
that, yes. And even a lot of the people who were presenting it, both on the BBC, everywhere, the presenters didn't get it either. We waited for a full minute before anybody realised who it was. Someone gave a hint before. They said, when the Cardinal who came on to announce him says Dominium, when he says it for the second time, yes, you know he's about to announce the name, so that's when you've got to listen really hard.
I think what was great about Pope Francis is that he immediately spoke to the people in Rome, because of course first and foremost he's their bishop. He spoke very confidently in Italian and spoke very intimately to them. And then, you know, what was that lovely line? You've gone a long way, you've looked a long way to find a pope.
You've gone to the end of the world to find a pope, and here I am.
From Buenos Aires. I mean, what I love about the Catholic Church is that it's so Catholic. We have a man who's working class, Italian origins, brought up in Argentina, educated in Germany. I mean, this is a man who has so much experience.
Isn't one of the other surprises, though, that he's old? And I think there was quite a lot of sort of discussion about, and you yourself pointed out, that the crowd is quite young. And presumably there are a lot of young people in the Catholic Church who might have been thinking to themselves, well, what we need is we've had somebody who's had to retire because of old age. What we need now is somebody who's sort of young and can inject a bit of energy into the Church.
I'd imagine the Pope's would have been sensitive to his health, but even if he's in good health at his age, what he brings with his age is such experience. I mean, he has been bishop of a diocese, the city of Buenos Aires, which is a huge Catholic population with great needs and great strength for some time. So what he brings with that, and everything else he's done before, is vast experience. And I'd rather have the vast experience than someone who was young and could dance from the balcony, but really didn't know what he was about.
I don't think Jackie was actually suggesting that.
In actual fact, I was very impressed. I didn't want him to dance, and one of the things I was impressed, and I'm the sort of token non-Catholic here, but I thought that his calmness and the way he just stood there, and as you said, his humility was actually quite a good sign.
But didn't you think at the beginning, when he first came out, there was this moment, the presenter had been saying he's got this most amazing smile, and he didn't smile, and he was kind of very serious, and I thought, oh God, what's wrong? And then I realised why, because there was a band in the square and they were playing the Italian national anthem, and he was waiting until that was finished before he spoke.
But also it must have been a very daunting moment for him. I mean, you don't know that it's going to be you, and suddenly your whole life has changed, and this huge responsibility.
If you think of the psychology of it, he's never going to, he'll only now go back to his home country should he arrange a visit there. He's left everything, and suddenly everyone is looking to him, and he's standing on this balcony, and below him are tens and tens and tens of thousands of people I mean, it's extraordinary, and yet he remained calm, he was warm, and he came back. Remember, he asked for the microphone again when we thought he had finished.
I saw that, yes.
To say, buona notte, buona
Yes.
riposa, good night, and sleep well.
Do you think, Father Paul, that he must be daunted by, any pope would be daunted by taking on the job, but this particular pope has a huge job. I mean, the church has been in crisis.
Well, I hope he is daunted, because that's the only sensible response. What we've seen is that he's immediately centered himself in prayer. The first thing he did after saying a buona sera was asking us to pray for him before he blessed us.
The pray for me thing, that was about him saying, wasn't it, pray for me to do a good job? Was that?
And yes, absolutely.
Yes.
But of course we all know what issues the church has had, but amongst 1.2 billion people, in fact, most of the stories are fantastic stories. He comes from a very lively church, very active, and he comes to a city that's there to love him and to support him.
And let me just show you some of the other front pages as well. And in fact, the Mirror and the Sun have gone with the same joke. It's the new hand of God, referring obviously to Maradona, the other famous Argentinian that we have been obsessed with in this country for some time. And the Sun there, just simply hand of God. And the significance of him being Argentinian, you touched on it earlier on, the fact that 42% of the world's Catholics are now living in South America.
Yes.
That's right. And so presumably when the cardinals elected this man, they must have been conscious of that, do you think, and were reaching out to that part of the world?
Well, it means he has immediate insight into the largest Catholic community and its particular issues and concerns, which of course must be important at the very heart of the church. But because of his education in Europe and his other jobs which he's done through his time, he's not going to be, as it were, over-fixated on Latin America. Please God, he'll bring the best of experience there, but also with a wide eye around the world.
And Jackie, just, sorry, as the non-Catholic, as you've portrayed yourself, the fact that the tabloids are going with this story, do you think this has real appeal to everybody, Catholic or not, this story?
Well, look, I understand and recognise that the Pope is the leader of 1.2 billion Catholics. He's a head of state. He plays a very important role, which has ripples beyond simply the Catholic Church. So I can completely understand this. And of course, as well, whilst it might not have the same religious significance for me, it was actually a pretty good spectacle. You know, smoke, crowds of people, the balcony and everything. So I think there were quite a lot of people who were
I think Catholic or not, it was incredibly emotional. You couldn't fail to be moved by the crowd's reaction, by what he was like when he came out. The feeling in the square, people have been gathering in that square since 8:30 this morning in the pouring rain, waiting just to see the smoke. They didn't even know if they were going to see a Pope tonight, but they were just there waiting, and the world was waiting with them.
And Jackie makes a good point why it should also matter to everyone, whether we're Catholic or not. And it was the reason why I think the previous government invited him for a state visit, is because the church is involved in the education of people all over the world. In sub-Saharan Africa, I think it runs something like 60% of the hospitals in certain parts of Africa. In other parts of the world, it's involved in many social and justice issues and also peacemaking. Please God, we're going to have a great man who is able, as Pope Benedict and John Paul II before him, work with the world and all the issues that we have to face.
OK, let's move on to some of the other stories that crop up in the papers, because there are, of course, plenty of others. Let's move to the Mail now. And they're talking there at the top of the page about warnings about Britain's ageing population and the suggestion that half of our children will live to be 103.
Well, this is a story of two halves, really. The good news is we're all living longer. Our children, hopefully, if their health is good, will live even longer than we have. But of course, that brings with it particular problems. It brings with it increasing pressure on the health service, on social care, questions about how we're going to pay for pensions. And the House of Lords have actually done a report, their Committee on Public Service and Demographic Change, which has suggested that actually I think they use the words woefully unprepared for the implications of that change in demography and the ageing population, which is particularly worrying given the link then to some of the concerns about the health service.
Yeah, there's another story on the front page of the Telegraph, which I would think is linked to this, and it's a plan for the NHS boss David Nicholson to step down. They're talking about a plan for him to go at some point in the future, that he's going to pre-announce his retirement as chief executive, which is interesting because, you know, up until a few days ago at the Parliamentary Committee, he was insisting that he wasn't going to resign.
He said he was the right man
he said
to
he was
push through the reforms.
He said he insisted he was the only man that could steer the NHS through its current reforms. And I think he used the words, you know, they need, you know, the NHS needs me. And here we are. And what I don't understand is why Cameron, Jackie and I have just been talking, why Cameron is backing him so much. And Jackie, you were saying that...
Well, I mean, I think first of all, David Cameron actually does have a record of not sacking people,
yes,
and supporting people, which I actually believe is a good thing. I think the second thing is, you know, if I had got a mum or a dad or a relative who had suffered in the mid-staff situation, for example, I would probably be looking for somebody to go as a result of that.
Yes.
But on the other hand, if David Nicholson goes, does that actually, of itself, lead to any better healthcare?
But he can't be a good chief executive in the sense, because when he was the boss at Mid-Staffs, you know, he said in this committee the other day, he actually described why he wasn't a good boss at Mid-Staffs. He said that, you know, he had the data that said that talked about the soaring mortality rates. He said he hadn't read it. He pretended that because he didn't know about a situation, which he actually should have as chief executive, then he couldn't be held responsible for the deaths there, which, to me, if you're the boss, you're the top man, you take responsibility for what happens on your watch in your hospitals.
Okay, and Father Paul, the kind of broader question about, you know, the state of the NHS, but also going back to the first story we talked on the subject of the NHS and how we look after our elderly. Is that something that is a concern for you when you do your work in your community?
Catholic priests going to old people's homes and hospitals often. And though I understand why there was a move to a focus upon the education, for example, of the nursing staff to a sort of academic qualifying height that we had not had before, everyone agrees that what seems to have been lost was a culture of that direct care, feeding those who couldn't feed themselves, not leaving those who were in embarrassment because of what our bodies do, stuck in their embarrassment.
It's basic compassion, which I think isn't just lacking in hospitals for elderly people, it's lacking in society generally. And I don't know what we do about that. It's something that I think has become very noticeable in the past decade.
The chaplaincy I work in at the University of Essex is, you know, very international, Catholics from all over the world. And it is striking, for example, if a Nigerian talks about the elderly in their community, you have a sense where the elderly person is the most respected, the most honoured, at the heart of the family. Well, it may be fair to say that for many of us in this country, the elderly are put away and kept out of sight.
Okay, on that note, something to think about at least, we are going to take a break. Lots more.